The morning mist clung to our valley like the breath of sleeping giants, and I remember thinking that the world had never seemed more beautiful than it did on that last day of my childhood. My name was Stefan, and I was 13 summers old when they came for me. The sheep moved through the fog like ghosts, their bells creating a melody that had lulled me to sleep every night of my life. My father, Milos, walked beside me in comfortable silence, his weathered hands steady on his shepherd's staff. The scent of wild thyme and morning dew filled my lungs as we climbed the familiar path toward the high pastures. "The lambs are growing strong," my father said, his voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of a man who had found his place in the world. "By autumn, we'll have enough wool to trade in the market town." I nodded, imagining the journey to the market, the coins in our leather pouch, perhaps enough for new boots before winter. Such simple dreams we had then. Dreams that fit within the boundaries of our small world like water in a wooden cup. The sound reached us before we saw them, the rhythmic thunder of many horses moving at speed. My father's face drained of color so quickly I thought he might collapse. The shepherd's staff trembled in his grip. "Home," he whispered, the word barely audible. "We must get home to your mother." But we were too late. By the time we reached our village, the Ottoman tax collectors had already assembled the population in the central square. I counted perhaps 40 mounted soldiers, their weapons gleaming in the morning sun, their faces showing the casual indifference of men performing routine duties. The lead official, a man whose silk robe seemed impossibly clean despite the long journey, unrolled a parchment and began reading names in accented Slavic. Each name was a knife thrust into our community's heart. When they called Stefan, son of Milos the shepherd, my mother's wail rose above all other sounds, a sound I would hear in my dreams for years to come. My mother, Anna, threw herself at the official's feet, clutching at his robes with hands that still smelled of the bread she had been baking. "Please," she sobbed in our language, then attempted broken Turkish. "He is my only son. Take me instead. Take anything else." The official looked down at her with the mild annoyance of a man brushing away a persistent insect. "The Sultan has need of strong, intelligent boys," he said in careful Slavic, as if reciting a memorized speech. "Your son will serve the empire. He will rise to heights you cannot imagine. This is an honor." They bound our hands loosely, tight enough to prevent escape, loose enough to avoid injury to valuable property. As the cart rolled away from everything I had ever known, I turned to watch my village disappear into the mist. My mother ran after us until she could run no more, her voice calling my name until distance swallowed the sound. Beside me sat a boy perhaps 2 years older, with the dark hair and olive skin of the southern regions. "I am Dmitri," he whispered, when the guards weren't looking, "from a fishing village near the sea." "Stefan," I replied. "My father raises sheep." "My father builds boats," Dmitri said, his voice hollow. "Built boats. I suppose that life is over now." The journey to Istanbul took 3 weeks that felt like 3 years. We walked 18 hours each day across terrain that grew more foreign. With each step, the food was adequate, but unfamiliar flatbread that tasted of cumin, dried meat that had been seasoned with spices I couldn't identify. At night, we slept in the open or in caravanserai where the walls seemed to press close around us like the edges of a grave. On the 5th day, a boy named Marco, red-haired and freckled, taken from a mountain village, attempted to escape during the pre-dawn darkness. The guards found him before he had gone a mile. They brought him back and beat him in front of all of us, not severely, enough to cause permanent damage, but thoroughly enough to serve as education. "Escape is death," Dmitri whispered to me that night as we lay shivering under thin blankets. "Not immediate death, perhaps, but death nonetheless. We have no homes to return to now. They've made sure of that." I wanted to argue, to insist that my parents would welcome me back, but doubt had already begun its slow poison work in my mind. How long would they wait? How long before they gave me up for dead and tried to rebuild their lives around the hole I had left behind? Istanbul appeared before us like a vision from a fever dream. The city sprawled across hills and water, its minarets reaching toward heaven like the spears of a buried army. The call to prayer echoed across the water as our ferry approached the Sure, a sound both beautiful and alien that seemed to wrap around my heart like chains. Look there, said Ahmet, an older boy who had somehow befriended our guards during the journey. He pointed toward a massive complex of buildings surrounded by high walls. Topkapi Palace, our new home. The word home sounded like mockery in his mouth, but I noticed that his eyes held something that might have been anticipation. Some boys, I was learning, adapted faster than others. The selection process began immediately upon our arrival. We were divided into groups and led to different sections of the palace complex. White-robed eunuchs examined us with the clinical attention of horse traders, checking our teeth, measuring our height, testing our reflexes, evaluating our responses to simple commands in Turkish. The eunuch who examined me had eyes like winter water and hands that were surprisingly gentle. "You are healthy," he said in accented Slavic. "Intelligent eyes, good bone structure. You'll go to the third court for Enderun training." He made a mark on his tablet, and I noticed that my life had been reduced to a series of symbols in a language I couldn't read. The dormitory where I would sleep for the next 7 years stretched before me like a marble tomb. 40 beds lined the walls, each covered with silk that felt foreign against my skin. The boy assigned to the bed next to mine was perhaps 15, with intelligent dark eyes and the careful posture of someone who had learned to make himself invisible. "I am Mehmet," he said quietly, "though my birth name was Georgi. I have been here 2 years. I can teach you what you need to know to survive." That first night, I lay awake listening to the sounds that would become the soundtrack of my imprisonment. The soft sobbing of homesick boys, whispered conversations in languages from across the empire, the footsteps of supervisors, patrolling the corridors. I clutched the small wooden cross my mother had pressed into my hand, but by morning, even that would be discovered and taken away. The conversion ceremony took place in the palace mosque, a space so beautiful it seemed designed to overwhelm resistance through sheer aesthetic force. The dome soared above us like a piece of captured sky, and light streamed through stained glass windows in colors I had never seen. "Repeat after me," said the imam, his voice echoing in the vast space. "La ilaha illa Allah, wa Muhammadan Rasulallah." The words felt like stones in my mouth, but I spoke them along with 30 other boys. Some wept as they recited the Shahada, others showed no emotion at all. I found myself somewhere between the two, performing the motions while holding fast to memories of my mother singing Orthodox hymns as she worked. They gave me a new name that day. Selim told me to forget Stefan had ever existed. But late at night, I would whisper my true name into my pillow like a prayer, terrified that one day I might forget the sound of it entirely. The education began immediately and was unlike anything I could have imagined. We learned Arabic, Persian, and Turkish, not just the speaking, but the reading and writing that opened entire worlds of knowledge. Mathematics that could predict the movements of stars, geography that mapped empires, history that stretched back to prophets and kings. My teacher for mathematics was Master Hazen, a eunuch who had once been a boy like us, taken from somewhere in Anatolia decades earlier. His patience was infinite, his knowledge vast, but his eyes held secrets that made me uncomfortable. Intelligence, he told our class one morning as we worked with geometric proofs, is the most valuable commodity in the empire. More precious than gold, more powerful than armies. You boys possess something that can reshape the world if you learn to use it properly. Dmitri, who had proven gifted with languages, excelled in our Persian classes. It's like music, he told me during our brief rest periods. Once you understand the rhythm, the words begin to make sense. But with the education came other lessons, taught not in classrooms but in corridors and courtyards during the long hours between formal instruction. The palace operated according to hierarchies more complex than anything I had known in our village. Age, beauty, intelligence, and favor determined your position, and position determined everything: where you slept, what you ate, who protected you, and who might prey upon you. Mehmet, my bed neighbor, had navigated these hierarchies for 2 years and understood their brutal logic. The older boys have power, he explained one evening as we lay in the darkness. They can make your life easier or unbearable. Some want only respect and obedience. Others, he paused, and I heard him swallow hard. Others have different appetites. I learned to recognize the signs the way certain older students looked at the newest rivals, the careful way some boys moved through the halls, the hollow expressions of those who had learned to survive through submission. The palace was beautiful, cultured, filled with learning and art, but underneath its marble surfaces ran currents of exploitation that no one discussed openly. Spring arrived in the palace gardens like a whispered promise. The cypress trees sent their shadows across courtyards where we practiced calligraphy. The fountain jets caught sunlight and threw it in dancing patterns across marble stones, and the air carried the scent of roses and jasmine. One had been in the palace for 6 months when I met Yusuf, a boy from my own region who had been taken the year before my arrival. He found me in the calligraphy garden during our afternoon practice session. "You hold the reed pen like you're afraid it will bite you," he said, settling beside me on the marble bench. "Here, watch." His movements were fluid, confident, and the Arabic letters flowed from his pen like water. But when he spoke our native language carefully, quietly, when no supervisors were near, his voice carried an ache that matched my own. "I dream of home," he confessed one afternoon as we worked together on a particularly difficult passage from the Quran. "Every night, I dream I'm walking through our valley, and my mother is calling me in for supper. Then I wake up here, and for a moment I can't remember which world is real." The military training began in our second year. We learned swordplay, archery, and the complex formations that had made Ottoman armies the terror of Europe. Master Kemal, a scarred veteran who had fought in Hungary, taught us that warfare was both art and science. The empire expands because its soldiers think, he told us as we practiced with wooden swords in the third court. Any fool can swing a blade, but a janissary must read the battlefield. Like a scholar reads a text, Dmitri proved naturally gifted with weapons, his fisherman's balance serving him well in sword practice. I excelled at archery, finding that the steady patience required reminded me of watching sheep in the high pastures. But the irony was not lost on me. They were training us to conquer places, like the home we had lost. During rest periods, we would often talk about the villages we had left behind. How different would they look now? Had the grass grown over the paths we used to walk? Did our mothers still set places for us at their tables? The palace ceremonies were spectacles designed to overwhelm the senses and demonstrate the empire's power. During the feast celebrating the prophet's birthday, I found myself serving sherbet to visiting officials in the hall of the divan. The walls were covered in tiles that seemed to shift and dance in the candlelight, and the air was thick with incense and the scent of rosewater. A visiting governor from Damascus watched me pour his drink with eyes that made my skin crawl. "This one has potential," he murmured to his companion. "Such grace, such beauty." The palace chooses well. I kept my expression neutral, my movements precise. But inside I felt something die a little more. I was learning that in the palace, beauty could be both protection and curse, that the very qualities that might save you could also destroy you. That night, lying in my narrow bed, I tried to remember my father's face clearly, but found that the details were beginning to blur. How long before I forgot entirely what home had looked like? By my third year, the rhythms of palace life had become as natural as breathing. I woke before dawn for morning prayers, attended classes until midday, practiced military skills in the afternoon, and spent evenings in study or contemplation. The seasons marked time's passage: winter's chill in marble corridors, spring's return to the gardens, summer's heat shimmering off tile and stone, autumn's golden light slanting through latticed windows. I had grown taller, my voice had deepened, and I spoke Turkish with an accent that was almost undetectable. The boy who had herded sheep in a mountain valley was becoming someone else entirely. Someone who could navigate palace politics, recite Persian poetry, and calculate the trajectory of cannon fire. But late at night, when the dormitory was quiet and the supervisors had completed their rounds, I still whispered prayers in the language of my childhood and tried to hold onto memories that grew more fragile with each passing day. Winter brought its own challenges. The marble carters became cold enough to numb fingers, and we huddled around braziers during our study periods. It was during one of these cold evening sessions that I witnessed something that would haunt me for years. A new boy, perhaps 12, years old, had caught the attention of an older student named Hazen, not Master Hazen, but a 17-year-old who had gained favor with the supervisors through his mathematical abilities. The new boy, Milos, a name that struck my heart because it was my father's name, was beautiful in the way that attracted dangerous attention in the palace. I watched from across the study hall as Hazen approached Milos with offers of protection, extra food, help with his lessons. I saw the fear in the younger boy's eyes, but also the terrible calculation, refuse and face isolation and punishment, accept and lose something that could never be recovered. That night, I lay awake listening to sounds from the far end of the dormitory that made me sick with rage and helplessness. In the morning, Milos moved through his duties like a ghost, and I saw in his dead eyes a reflection of what I might have become under different circumstances. Spring of my 4th year brought changes both subtle and profound. I had been selected for advanced studies in administration and diplomacy, which meant more freedom to move through the palace, access to the libraries, and interaction with government officials who came and went on imperial business. It was during this period that I met Mehmet Pasha, a former Devshirme boy who had risen to become one of the Sultan's most trusted advisors. He was perhaps 40 years old, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to hold all the palace's secrets. "You remind me of myself at your age," he told me during one of my advanced seminars on statecraft. "Intelligent, adaptable, but still carrying the weight of what you've lost. That weight can either destroy you or forge you into something stronger than you ever imagined." After the formal session ended, he asked me to walk with him in the gardens. "Tell me," he said as we moved beneath the flowering trees, "do you still think of home?" The question was dangerous expression of continued loyalty to our former lives was discouraged, but something in his manner suggested safety. "Every day," I admitted. He nodded slowly. "Good. Those who forget completely become hollow men, useful to the empire but empty of soul. Those who remember too much become paralyzed by grief. The secret is to carry your past like a sword, something that makes you stronger, not something that cuts you." The palace celebrated academic achievements with ceremonies that rivaled religious festivals. When I was selected to present my treatise on border fortifications to the Sultan himself, I felt both pride and a strange emptiness. The boy who had once known every stone in a mountain path was now being honored for designing defenses against the kind of raids that had taken him from his home. The Sultan sat on a throne that seemed carved from light itself, surrounded by officials whose robes caught and reflected the glow of 100 oil lamps. When I finished my presentation, he nodded approvingly and made some comment to his vizier that I couldn't quite hear. Later, Master Hazen found me in the gardens. His Majesty was impressed. He said, "Such recognition marks you for great things. Selim, few boys achieve such notice so young." But as I walked back to the dormitory that night, I wondered what my father would think of his son designing walls to keep out people like himself. The irony felt like a knife twisting in my chest. By my 6th year, I had grown into someone my family might not recognize. I was tall now, with the careful posture of palace training, fluent in 5 languages, skilled in arts my father had never heard of. When I caught my reflection in the polished bronze mirrors that lined certain corridors, I saw a young Ottoman gentleman, not a shepherd's son from a forgotten valley. The internal conflict had evolved from sharp pain to a constant, dull ache. I served the empire that had taken me with competence and even enthusiasm, but part of me remained forever that 13-year-old boy reaching toward a mother who grew smaller in the distance. Dmitri had chosen a different path of adaptation. He threw himself completely into Ottoman identity, became devoutly religious, spoke of his former life as if it belonged to someone else entirely. "The past is dead weight," he told me one evening as we prepared for our final examinations. "I am Dmitri no longer. I am David, servant of the Sultan, defender of the faith. Nothing else matters." But I saw how his hands shook when he thought no one was looking, and I heard him murmur words in his original language when he talked in his sleep. The final year brought preparations for graduation and assignment to positions throughout the empire. We participated in complex diplomatic simulations, managed mock provinces, and demonstrated our mastery of all the skills the palace had taught us. I had been selected for possible assignment to the foreign ministry, which would mean travel throughout Europe, negotiating with the very kinds of communities from which I had been taken. The irony was not lost on me. I would return to Christian lands as an Ottoman diplomat, my origins hidden beneath layers of imperial education and Islamic conversion. Master Hazen called me to his chambers one evening near the end of our training. His room was filled with maps, books, and astronomical instruments, the accumulated treasures of a lifetime spent in imperial service. "You have done well, Selim," he said, pouring tea that smelled of cardamom and cinnamon. "But I sense in you a divided heart. This is not uncommon among the most thoughtful of our graduates." I waited, unsure how much I dared reveal. "The empire requires capable servants," he continued, "but it also requires men who can think beyond simple obedience. Your background, your memories, your ability to understand both worlds. These are not weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths to be cultivated." Graduation day arrived with all the pomp the palace could muster. We stood in formation in the Great Hall, wearing robes that marked our new status as graduated servants of the empire. Officials read our assignments in voices that echoed off marble walls adorned with calligraphy praising God and Sultan. Selim ibn Abdullah. Came my turn, assigned to the foreign ministry, with immediate posting to the embassy in Vienna. Vienna, the heart of the Habsburg Empire, the Christian realm that stood as the Ottoman Empire's greatest rival. I would walk the streets of a city not unlike the market town my father had dreamed of visiting, but I would walk them as a representative of the power that had torn me from my home. As I stepped forward to receive my assignment documents, I caught sight of my reflection in a polished brass panel. The young man looking back at me wore Ottoman robes with natural grace, carried himself with the confidence of imperial education, and bore the secret weight of two identities that would never fully reconcile. My last morning in Topkapi Palace, I climbed to the walls overlooking the Bosphorus and watched the sun rise over the water that separated Europe from Asia. The call to prayer began from the Sultan Ahmed Mosque, soon joined by voices from minarets across the city, creating a symphony that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat. I tried to imagine what lay ahead: the courts of European princes, negotiations conducted in languages I now spoke better than my mother tongue, the careful balance of representing an empire I served, while carrying the secret grief of everything it had cost me. In my mind, I could still see my parents' faces, though the details had softened with time like paintings left too long in sunlight. I could still hear my mother's voice singing as she worked, though I had to concentrate now to recall the melody. These memories had become precious artifacts, carefully preserved in the hidden chambers of my heart. The boy named Stefan was gone forever, buried beneath years of Ottoman education and Islamic conversion. But he had not died entirely. He lived on in the way I noticed the fear in captured boys' eyes, in my silent prayers for the families I would never see again, in the careful way I would one day handle negotiations with Christian princes who might remind me of the father I had lost. I was Selim now, educated, capable, loyal to an empire that had given me opportunities my original life never could have provided. But I was also something the palace had never intended: to create a bridge between worlds, carrying the memories of what had been taken along with the skills to navigate what had been given in return. As the morning light spread across the water and the great city awakened to another day, I descended from the walls to begin the next chapter of a life that would forever be divided between what I had lost and what I had become. The palace had shaped me into its instrument, but it had not managed to erase entirely the boy who had once known every stone in a mountain path and dreamed of simple things like new boots and market days. In the end, perhaps that was its own form of victory, not the complete transformation the system intended, but the survival of something essentially human beneath the imperial polish. I carried forward not just the education and opportunities the palace had provided, but also the unbreakable knowledge of what such opportunities cost, and the quiet determination that someday, somehow, that cost would matter in the choices I made. The morning call to prayer faded into the sounds of the awakening city, and I walked toward my new life carrying both gifts and ghosts, ready to serve an empire that had made me, while never quite forgetting the world it had unmade in the process.